dark forest marched right up to the water's edge, and the firs hung out over it, casting black shadows in a wavering ring around the lake. "It's 7:40, Mike called as he drew close. "The sun has officially been up for 1 minute. What's a guy got to do to beat you out here?" Wes didn't turn at the sound of Mike's voice, or laugh at his joke, or even acknowledge his presence. Mike dug his right oar into the water, slowing the boat and pulling even with Wes's small craft. "You know, one of these mornings Irene's gonna—" Mike's voice fell away as he stared at his friend. Wes's face was as expressionless as stone. If the man hadn't been standing on 2 feet, Mike might have thought he was dead. "Look," Wes said in a voice so quiet it neared reverence. Mike's eyes left his friend's face and followed his gaze to the trees. There, in the shadow of a giant hemlock, was a woman, hanging by her neck from a lower branch. The tips of her bare feet brushed the damp earth, and her arms dangled limply at her sides. Her back was to them, but there was no mistaking who she was. No one else in Point Orchards had hair like that. Perfect corn-silk blonde hair that fell in a sleek wave all the way to her lower back. Hair that Mike Ginter and every other man in town admired when they stepped into her office. Hair that his wife said was impractical for a doctor. A breeze stirred and her body twisted slowly on the rope. Mike looked away. He didn't want to see her face. 2 minutes after 9 in the morning, Sheriff Jim Godbout tied the silver police skiff to a felled log on shore. His young deputy, Jeremy, was already circling the tree where Dr. Aaron Landry hung, running his eyes up and down her body. "There's a note," Jeremy called as Jim approached. The deputy slid a folded piece of paper from the pocket of Aaron's fleece jacket, careful to avoid touching the cold hand that guarded it. He passed it to the sheriff, and Jim unfolded it, scanning it quickly. When he reached the end, he read it again, this time lingering over the words. He sighed deeply as he refolded the note and tucked it into his pocket. When he lifted his face to meet his deputy's eyes, he looked every bit as old as his 68 years. "Well," Jeremy pressed. "Let's get her down," the sheriff said sadly. Jeremy used a branch at shoulder height to pull himself up into the tree and clambered through the boughs to the branch where the rope was tied off. "She must have climbed up, tied the rope, and jumped," he called down, his fingers making slow work of the frozen knot. The sheriff wrapped his arms around Aaron's waist as the rope slid free. Her body folded over his shoulder, and he laid her gently on the ground beside a cluster of frost-tinted ferns. Twice he tried to close her eyes, but they stayed stubbornly open. Jeremy jumped down through the boughs and landed with a grunt. Together, the two men stared down at the 35-year-old doctor, who was every bit as beautiful in death as she had been in life. "I just can't figure why," Jim said, shaking his head. "You mean why she did it?" "No, I mean, why here? The trees in this town outnumber the people 1,000 to 1. Why this tree, way out in back of the Leith place? She could have done it anywhere. Out here, her body might not have been found for weeks, months even, if Wes and Mike hadn't come fishing." The sheriff crouched down and placed his hand on the forest floor beside Aaron's head. He pinched a bit of damp earth between his finger and thumb and studied it. These woods still unnerved him after 25 years. They weren't the golden woods of his youth in the Blue Ridge. Appalachian forests were straightforward and predictable. They abided by the seasons, budding green and lush as spring slid into summer, turning orange and yellow with the fall, and dropping their leaves compliantly at winter's bid, spending the rest of the year standing naked and straight as matchsticks on the hills. There, every step was announced by the crunch of dead leaves and the snapping of twigs. Those were noisy, airy forests that provided constant bird song and cicadas for company. These Washington woods were different. They refused to change for the calendar and seemed designed for silence. Padded moss and thick layers of dead pine muffled footfalls and soaked up voices the way the rich, dark earth absorbed